Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. So we're going to be talking about things we can do to avoid disciplinaries at work, and why that's important and why we're interested in it from both a managerial point of view and from a HR point of view. So we'll get straight in and get started. This webinar has also got a blog that supports it, so please feel free to download a copy of the blog as well if you find that useful. So why don't we talk about this? So for lots of managers, a disciplinary is absolutely the worst part of their people management job. No one likes doing them, no one enjoys doing them. They're really time consuming if you do them properly. And you get into the process and the detail, then they take a lot of time up and they cause disruption for you, for the individual. They're just generally an unpleasant experience to have to go through. However, they're important, and it's really important that we do them properly, which is why you should have a process in place, a disciplinary process. And if you haven't got a disciplinary process in your business, then you should be referring to the ACAS guidelines. So they provide a really good, clear set of framework into which to work your disciplinary. They're also the reference point for employment tribunals. So if you were ever unfortunate enough to go through a disciplinary that then for some reason ended up in a tribunal with a claim against you, then the ACAS, the tribunal chair or panel would be looking at the process that you went through, and they'd be looking at that as a minimum in line with ACAS if you haven't got a local disciplinary policy. So it's really important that you have a disciplinary policy, and it's really important that your line managers are familiar with it, and it's also really important that that your team understand that it's there, when it's going to be used, what it's going to be used for. And again, so there's a big chunk of communication. So where I would start from a disciplinary point of view is, before we get into the disciplinary process and how to prevent it, we'd make sure that we had put all the foundations in prior to this point. So the first thing we would do is we'd think about how we establish our relationship with our employees. So we would talk to our employees about the standards that we set at work and our expectations for them. And there's a way to do that that feels not very finger wagging. I saw an example of a handbook years ago, and literally the handbook started with like a welcome message. So this is the company, this is what the company does, welcome to us, it's great that you're working with us. The first paragraph after that was, here are all the ways that are recognised gross misconduct in this company and will result in your dismissal. And then they're listed out. And I just thought, what a strange way to start a relationship with a person. Not, here are all the great things that we do, here are all the great experiences you can have with us, we're so excited you're joining with us. It was literally, if you break these rules, you're in trouble and you're going to get dismissed. And it just felt like the wrong way to establish a relationship. But we do need to set standards at work. So that might be, the standard might be about timekeeping, or about quality of work, or about how we behave with our colleagues. And so we should talk through those things, and we should set those boundaries at the beginning so that there is no opportunity for people to get them wrong. So we take responsibility as our employers and as managers to go through that process. So that's what we'll do, is we'll set standards and we'll make sure people understand that that's expected from us. And that's really, really important. Okay, so as part of that, then we talk about treating our employees like adults. And so very much by equipping them with the information, they then choose what decisions they make in the workplace. So that's really, really important that we start that new relationship in that right way. We talk about standards, we treat people like adults so they can make their own decisions. So if you start a relationship and you can say, this is our workplace, or this is our work ethic, and these are our cultural values, and this is how we speak to each other, and this is how we speak to our customers and our clients. And then if someone joins the company and says, that doesn't work for me, that's too formal, that's too informal, I don't like working in that way, then culturally, that this might not be the right organization for them. And that's okay to have that conversation, to say, this is how we like to work. We are quite a formal organization or an informal organization. You know, we need to be in the workplace, we do hybrid working, whatever those standards are that we work to. And then that employee and you can decide together whether this is the right place for them or not. So I think treating people like adults that's really, really important. So within the blog, we talk about a piece of research that was done. It's actually quite out of date now, I guess, in some ways. So 2013, so Personnel Today did 11 most common issues raised at a disciplinary. So no surprises, the sort of the top ones. So if we look down the list, we've got discrimination in there. That's at number 11. Now, I think if we did the study again, that might be higher. This time, not necessarily because there's more discrimination because we are educating people more, but because I think um, we are, as part of that education process, we are giving people the voice and the power to put their hands up and say when things aren't working for them. And so we might see a rise in cases as more cases are brought forward and more cases are tackled. And then we start to see a different sort of norm in the workplace. Then as those issues are tackled, employers realize that this is serious, that we should be doing the right set of behaviors. And so then we'll see that sort of that rebalance start to come into the workplaces. So discrimination's in there, then things like substance abuse, violence in the workplace, health and safety breaches. I think that they would be relatively common still. They would still show up in there. Theft, bullying and harassment, and then things like misuse of company resources. So that could be misuse of email, internet, social media. I think that one would be quite interesting to go and have a look at again, in terms of what sort of business you are, um, and social media. So I think because a lot of companies now um, have sort of two routes that they go down. So we say we've got misuse of resources, so things like misuse of laptops, mobile phones, etc. A lot of people have their own equipment now, and so I think we don't see as much of that maybe in a lot of places because people tend to use their own phones, their own equipment, maybe more than the company equipment. However, what will be interesting is a lot more people have as part of their role posting or being present in social media platforms to build up their own followers. So if I think about somebody like recruiters, or people that work in that digital sector, where they are expected to post maybe on behalf of the company or as an employee representing the company. And so what we see here is we would see a need for, again, setting boundaries, being really clear what our expectation is of our employee when they are representing the company or associated with the company in those spaces. So it might be as simple as saying, if you're posting on behalf of the company, please no political views, for instance, and please no extreme views. There may be something about brand loyalty, so you might have really clear brand guidelines about sort of humor or banter or what you post and what you don't post. So again, you might need to think about the standards that you're setting to avoid going into that disciplinary space. So then the next sort of batch that we see coming together is things like unauthorized absence and poor timekeeping. So again, it would be interesting to see. I mean, this study was from 2013. It would be interesting to see now, is timekeeping still as high up on that list with flexible working for a lot of employees, so that the fixed start and finish time for a lot of companies isn't quite so fixed now? And so does that remove poor timekeeping, or actually is it still an issue that we see showing up there? um, and then the final two, no surprise, I guess, poor performance and capability showing up in there, but using disciplinary process, and then obviously general misconduct. So that could be, that just, I guess, is a myriad of other things gathered together. So if we talk about standards a lot and we set those standards, then hopefully the first thing we do to avoid disciplinaries is we remove ambiguity. And so by removing that ambiguity and having regular conversations about what our business looks like, what we represent, how we deal with our customers, how we deal with our suppliers, how we behave when we're representing the company, and we talk about that not in a disciplinary way, but just in a, this is our culture, this is our company. When we onboard people, when we have team meetings, are there things that are our non-negotiables, for instance, so things that must happen in a certain way, and we set those standards quite high for that. So that's the first thing we do, definitely, around setting the standards and talking about them regularly and build them into our conversations, not wait for people to breach them and then start disciplinary conversations. So the second thing for me is, again, I mentioned it briefly already, is about building your relationship with your team. As you build that relationship with your team, then it allows you again to really start to set the standards, to very quickly um, point out where something doesn't align with a standard, not in a parent to child way, so it's a telling off, but actually where there is that interactivity. So maybe a joke is told in the office that just feels inappropriate for your workplace, and you can very quickly then say, I don't think that fits for us, or that's actually, there's people that might find that offensive, so I think that's not really the tone we're looking for. Rather than um, something that feels like very much a sit down and a formal telling off. So building that relationship that allows you to have those conversations. That you've gone a bit far now. Okay, you need to stop now. That's not acceptable in terms of our conversations. So for me, that's a really important one, being able to have that relationship so you can very easily in the moment sort of take something out or point something out. And hopefully by doing that, what happens over time is you get peer-to-peer support as well. So it's not manager always into the team saying, That's not how we behave around here." Actually, the team themselves saying, "I'm sorry, no, that's not how we behave. As a team, we wouldn't talk like that to each other." So that's really helpful. So we can also go on to then think about early intervention or preventative action. So this for me is probably the most important one. So this is about not waiting to tackle things. It's about when you see things, or even sort of signals that things are heading in a particular direction, catch them early. Have those conversations on a regular basis, bring them up in the one-to-ones, so that before they escalate. So we tend to get a lot of queries from clients where there may have been one or two small incidents, and then something bigger happens, and we get the call when the big thing happens. So they'll say, "Can you now help us do a disciplinary or an investigation because this has happened?" And when they tell you the story about the incident that they're ringing you about, there's always some back history. There's always that person started then, and then this has happened, and there's been some little niggles, or there've maybe been a few things said, or I've had to have a quick, like maybe someone's had a quick word with them, and then it's escalated really quickly into something really big and really formal. So if you can nip them in the bud quickly through that preventative action, have those conversations, flag up the behavior or the activity or the standard of work or whatever it is, pick it up quickly. Quite often, I would say maybe 85-90% of cases, if you pick it up early and you communicate to that person that the thing they're doing is out of kilter with what we're looking for as a business, then you'll see that correction being made. So if you say, I'm sorry, we don't swear in our office, as an example, so we set a standard, or I'm sorry, there's just certain, some of the swear words are okay, but some of the swear words are not okay. And so, as we've sort of got an agreement amongst the team about what's okay and what's not okay. And so I'm just having a word with you now to say some of that language you're using is not okay. We need you to bring it back in. We need you just to think about it before you say it. Okay, right, okay, enough done. Okay, we'll leave it there then now. So you can have those conversations with somebody else to get that early intervention. And if you link that to the standards, they're quite straightforward to have. They don't need to be really hard. They don't need to be very formal. They don't need to be very finger wagging. I've told you, um, on that first occasion. You definitely want to say, okay, we don't need to say any more about it now. Let's just carry on with our job, our day job. So definitely early interaction, nipping it in the bud quickly. I think for me, that's the biggest thing you can do. I've mentioned it already, but be careful around office banter. We see a lot of cases, if you read in tribunal, where the defense will be that it was just banter, we didn't mean it, we were just joking. But actually that office banter can stray into territory where people feel uncomfortable, where it can feel unwanted, where it can verge on some sort of discriminatory behavior or bullying behavior. You need to be especially careful when you have changes in the team as well. So if you have maybe a team that are well established, they've worked together for a while, they have that, I don't know, the Monday morning football banter. So every Monday, there's a level of, cynical abuse with each other, whose team did well, whose team didn't do so well, and the sort of the general banter that comes with that. And then the team grows and changes, and actually what you see in there is then that well-established routine that smaller group had, it might not work for the other people in the room. So all of a sudden it might feel a little bit aggressive or a bit bullying. And so again, just need to think about the tone of it. Need to think about your audience and that perception. And you do need to be careful of that office banter. I don't want to come across as the fun police, but as a manager, if you don't pick it up early, then what happens is you end up with responsibility for those disciplinaries or those grievance cases being heard down the line. So definitely keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on the body language, for instance. So people might not say anything as such. They might not say, oh, that really offended me. But it might be just the fact that they've stepped out of the conversation, or they just, maybe their facial expression, they don't look hugely impressed. Just pick up on it and keep an eye on it, because that's really, really important. Another thing that definitely you should be doing in there is keeping notes of your conversations. So if there's been something happen, even if it was quite informal or quite small, and then you've had to have a conversation with somebody, just make a note of it. It could be as simple as just writing it in your diary. Obviously, don't make it, if it's an electronic diary that everyone can see, maybe don't put it in there in a way that's really obvious to other people, but just keep a note of it. So it's really interesting sometimes when you'll say to somebody, oh, that person's had a little bit of absence, actually. They seem to have a bit more absence than everyone else. And then when you actually get the records out, you say, oh, actually, it's quite a lot of absence now. I've looked at the records. Or you might say, I spoke to somebody 2 weeks ago about this. And then when you look in the diary, you say, oh, actually, it wasn't 2 weeks at all. It was 6 weeks ago when that person was last late. So being able to have those on this day, we had this conversation previously, and now I'm having to have the conversation again with you. It's really useful to have a record of it. So make some notes, and make sure you're keeping track of them. Obviously, depending on what your HR record keeping policy is, or what your GDPR is. Think about where you store those notes securely. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is when you're having these preventative conversations, pre any sort of formal disciplinary action. So you are having to have a conversation with somebody about something that could escalate into disciplinary. They can feel like quite uncomfortable conversations. And one of the things I would do is I would think about how you actually structure those conversations. So, as a manager, you have to work with this person every day. So the idea of connecting in with that person can be quite difficult. You think, well, I'm going to have an awkward conversation with them now, and then I'm going to be in meetings with them all afternoon or working on something with them. So it's really important to think about how you prepare your conversation and how you go into that conversation. So one of the things I like to do is I like to say what I've seen. So I have a really factual piece of information, of evidence. So I've seen this, I've noticed this, I've been aware of this as a starting point. So then you can start to understand from the other person what's going on, so that the manager starts the conversation really clear. So I have seen you making jokes in the office and other people look offended. So I want to talk to you about that. Or I have noticed that your timekeeping, it seems to be quite hit and miss at the moment. I've noticed that you aren't where you should be when you said you should be there. I've noticed that you've not been logged on when I needed you to be logged on, or in a normal working day. I've noticed that the conversations you're having with your colleagues might not be wholly inappropriate. Here's an example of what I mean by that. So that I've noticed can be a really useful starting point to having a conversation. So we can then think about what's in there, how it works, and we can start to talk about the impact on the team. So we've done that, I've noticed, and then we can say, then there's an impact because. So there's an impact because that doesn't align with our customers. I've noticed when you are taking customer complaints that you're quite rude to the customers, or you're very direct with the customers. And here at our company, that's not the approach we take. We take a different approach, and then let's talk about some training maybe, or let's talk about why you feel that way, or let's talk about what's going on. So we do lots of asking lots of questions. Make sure you're listening, so that if there is a gap from our point of view, that from a manager point of view or a company point of view, we can actually then give support and advice. So we do find sometimes that a disciplinary has come to light, and actually what's happened is it's the company that's at fault. So we made a commitment to deliver training, we made a commitment to give people resources or equipment, and because we haven't done that, then someone is being punished for their conduct or their performance. So we need to shine a light on ourselves in terms of making sure we've taken responsibility where appropriate. So I think that can be really helpful in terms of then having those informal conversations. As I said, I think there's some really nice ways that if you need to do some resetting of standards, this again can be not always quite so easy for a team, but I've got a couple examples of things that you can do to set standards within the team. So if you have a reasonably well-established team, again, you might want to use some examples without singling people out. So you can talk about particular scenarios and talk about different people's views of them. So I came across this recently. So if we talk about hybrid working, because it's fairly new, it's very current, and for some people. So there was a manager, there was two managers talking, and they were talking about their teams and hybrid working. And one manager was saying, how great it is and how flexible it is, and how actually they've seen their team be very productive, because actually some of the team are parents, and so they are being able to flex their hours a little bit around things like the school run, or being available like at the end of the day when the children have gone to bed. They may be logging back on to pick some things up that they wouldn't have done. So one manager was talking about hybrid work in a really positive way, and the other manager was saying that he didn't like hybrid working at all. And he said, one of my team, had said to me, "Oh, I've just made a cup of coffee and put my washing out." And he said, "That's not acceptable behaviour." And the other manager said, "Yeah, but why not? Why isn't it? They're at home. Why can't they have 10 minutes, make a coffee, put their washing on the line?" And the other manager said, "Well, because they're at work. We're paying them to be at work. We're paying them to be at their desk." That's a really good example of then talking about, so what is the standard? What is acceptable and not acceptable for this group of people when they're working together? Is that okay or not okay? So, because the example would be, well, if I was in the office and I went to make a cup of coffee in the kitchen at work, I'd probably still spend 10 minutes chatting to my colleagues, having a conversation. There may be another colleague that wants to have a cigarette break, so it takes 10 minutes to have a cigarette break. There might be another colleague that wants to go and do jobs in their break and then comes back, but then still eats their sandwiches at their desk. So we can talk about standards in a way that says, is this okay or not okay? Does this feel fair and balanced in terms of how it works for us as a team and how it works for us as a company? So using those scenarios we are really, really helpful in terms of things like an example of a customer or of an example of how we share information with each other or how we talk to each other. So constantly doing those scenarios and setting standards is really important. Um, so as I say, a lot of the disciplinaries I think can be avoided, especially a lot of the ones around misconduct, about setting really clear standards, values, and behaviours. And then, as I say, then once those behaviours are set, and you don't do it once, it's not a once a year thing. You have a conversation, say this is the do's and don'ts of the company, and then leave it there. This has to be iterative. It has to be happening all the time. It has to be reinforced. You then need to think about where you thread it into your processes. So things like induction and onboarding, so new starting processes. You need to think about where and when you have those conversations, definitely. And then, as I say, um, when you start to maybe see things happen that don't fit those standards, catch them quickly, catch them early, take some preventative action, take appropriate action so that that individual understands exactly how they're breaching the standard or they're doing something that just doesn't fit in terms of the organization. And then obviously then if you do have to then head into a more formal process, make sure you've got your policies and procedures in place, make sure people are familiar with them, and then obviously use them properly. So if you've said there are 3 stages to your process, if you said that there will always be an investigation, then make sure you do the things that you've said in your policy. Do them well. And if you're stuck, ask for help. So there are people like myself working as HR consultants that can help you. You might have a local HR team that can help you. And also you've got ACAS, which is free service. They do a great job. So if you're not sure, pick up the phone and ring ACAS and ask for advice through them. They'll all be really helpful in terms of explaining your situation and then giving you some advice and guidance on how you will approach that situation. So good luck. I hope you don't have many disciplinaries, and I hope that they are few and far between. But I hope that also from your conversations with your employees, you have the opportunity to set standards, build relationships, and intervene early. Thank you very much.